I'm AngeliqueJDSJ, and this is the design process of where I was last at for my ADHD experience. From here we have the grey box and where I tried to visualize it in the space. Now, originally I had this all sort of gamified, and I had so many different kind of interactions, and as I've moved through my planning and spatializing everything, I have realized how intensive the project is and how much I really need to strip it right back, just to make it viable for the time frame that I have. And originally I had these all sort of mapped out in these sort of pathways, but I felt like they were too set. It didn't really give the room to make the space feel overexposed, like this is over here, or it didn't really give it the option to have that claustrophobic and anxious feeling when the user is moving through the space and I'm telling the story. And originally I was using blocks from the asset store, and here I was spatializing it and trying to move it around, but it wasn't really essentially working, and completely forgetting the terrain tool. I had used all these blocks, but again, the color coding and once adding textures, I felt like they were a little bit too much in comparison to using the controller. So I still kept with my plan here. I had, this is the top level and the bottom level. So the idea being the top plane of the user in the space trying to get to long-term memory, and then underneath would be the neural network. And I had other models that I've created, which such as this labyrinth maze, but there were a lot of things I had to start to strip back and completely discard. Just, again, it was just sort of cutting and editing as to what was essential to the project. So the beginning of the game is sort of, they first start out and they see there's long-term memory where they need to get to, and then there'll be a trigger to block everything. And instead of using this sort of spiral space, I decided to use these tubes. So when the controller hits this tube, the speed of the movement goes a lot faster. Now, I created this with these tubes, but I did notice there was a couple of issues, such as the camera view. But before I get into that, so I blocked them all out, I played with some textures and retiled them, so then I could make this sort of stretched out hyperdrive effect, like you see in movies. And then I've added some lights, and I really need to move the planes up and down just so it really has a comparison into the larger space. But this is something I'm still playing around with in the camera view of how you see the space. And next we have the time concept. So again, here I had it blocked out, and I realized again the terrain was going to be a better option in terms of using the space. So here I had it all blocked out with the ceiling over top, and I've added these models from Turbo Squid to sort of these sort of veins that are part of the neurons of the brain. But this felt too claustrophobic, and what it wouldn't really work in comparison to the hyperfocus tunnel. So that's when I really hit the nail on the head, and I was like, okay, I need to use the terrain to make it feel a little bit more exposed, because this is the part where I introduce the concept that the user will be activating this synapse. The synapses are created in Maya, and I did do a YouTube tutorial on making a crystal shader graph, which is still a work in progress. But the idea would be that once the user hits the synapse, it would make a sound, and then it would activate to kind of give this idea of this sort of glowing effect, just reconnecting the synapses together. This will be also quite text heavy, as in the elements of explaining of what's going on, and that they need to activate each synapse without the game in order to make it to the end point. And I'm using this kind of color scheme of this sort of glass glowing effect, which this frame here doesn't quite reflect, but this is the distraction zone, which isn't yet finished. It will be with a camera shake, and the controller movement will slow down. The user is supposed to feel frustrated because they get that sense that they can't really move forward. And I am not going to be using these models. They're a little bit too alien, but it does sort of map out the kind of idea where it will go. So that was the original plan, and this is how it will actually be structured in this space. going uphill, the sort of jagged, sharp rock elements of the side of the terrain just sort of adds to that irritation and sort of a sense of unease as they move through the space, which again isn't reflected yet. This is still yet to be marked out within the space. And then they'll move into another hyperfocus tunnel. This space here is the dead end zone. So this is where the user, aka me, has moments of mind fog. And again, I restructured this using the terrain. They will have to activate each of the synapses. So once the users has activated a few of the synapses, they'll go through the brain fog. And it is only once they hit the end of this brain fog that another section will reveal itself. And this was made up using just layers and layers of cubes across the space. And I've blocked it out so that they've had to move back. And this sort of also adds that element of like the disorientation and trying to navigate and find their way. So it's only once they've done that, that wall will appear. And as they move up to the space, the whole point of this one is spiraling up back to the top plane being the ideal space. And as you can see here, they've still got a little while to go. So overall, there's still quite a lot of implementation that needs to go into place. Now that the actual space itself has been completely mapped out, which was really crucial to the whole piece, I believe with the inclusion of my sound effects and with the interactions on top, I think it will move through quite well once the space, and it doesn't really need quite that sort of gamification that I originally planned for. Thank you very much.